Welcome to episode 20 of Renewing the Conversation, a series of interviews where we talk to leading industry professionals and experts about renewable energy and heating, with a focus on the home and what challenges face the industry and homeowners.
Today we welcome Martin Cooke, Managing Director of EOGB. We speak to Martin about modulating oil boilers and how they play a role in cutting carbon emissions when used with a biofuel like HVO.
Don't forget to hit the subscribe button below and please show us your support by giving us a thumbs up. Enjoy the interview.
Good morning, Martin. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on. I'm sure that some people might be sitting at home kind of raising their eyebrows and thinking, interesting. They're interviewing somebody about boilers on Renewable Heating Hub. But we're really excited to have you here because the last year in particular, the government have been quite vocal about phasing out boilers and just how polluting they are and all the negative things about boilers. Why is it that you feel that there is still a future for boilers, and what role are they gonna play in our houses in the future?
Okay, thank you. Good morning. I think the main issue is we've got a massive several decades here for this whole churn of boilers to actually get out of the system. This is one of the main issues we see, and also many boilers are not actually particularly run in a very efficient manner. So if it was looked at from a different perspective of energy saving through smart controls, smart thermostats, zoning of the property, you would find massive carbon savings and obviously the end users money in their pocket, just by purely optimizing systems rather than jumping all in decarbonisation. Let's work with what we've got for a while, whilst we have this natural churn of appliances, which will go on for several decades.
So boilers have most definitely started to get a bit of a bad rep for being polluting in our homes. Is there any way that you feel that because we have so many boilers in households in this country, over 90% of households have a boiler, do you feel that we've kind of maybe missed a trick with regards to actually, instead of just throwing the baby out with the bathwater and saying, okay, let's just get rid of all boilers and replace them with heat pumps? Do you think that there should have been more innovative thinking with regards to, okay, what can we do with the boilers that we have right now? How can we adapt them, and how can we bring in more efficient boilers into the market for people that can't afford to transition straight into a heat pump?
The main issue is in the UK housing stock is the insulation issues, especially in rural properties. If we're going to jump in straight in, it's the end user simply can't afford this. I mean, the government £5,000 grant, for example, to fit a heat pump only is scratching the surface of many properties. And I think BESA are now becoming aware of this situation. So let's look at what we've got and optimizing current heating systems. That's got to be the way forward, whilst it evolves, because we're all learning all the time of what is going to be the best heating system for a particular property, rather than shoehorning in a one-size-fits-all technology. I think every property needs to be looked at under its own merits. What is suitable for this particular property? Is it liquid fuel? Is it gas? Is it a hydrogen blend in the future? Is it air source heat pump, ground source, etc.? I think every property needs to be evaluated individually rather than this blanket a heat pump for the entire nation. We just feel that it's a little bit too soon to be rolling out heat pumps en masse when a lot of the work can be done to save carbon or reduce carbon on fossil fuel boilers. Let's work a little bit smarter here rather than just making them the total enemy. There's so much that can be done now.
Yeah, so just talk to us a little bit more about that. So I think that the understanding that most people have about boilers is that they have to run on fossil fuels. That's not actually true, is it?
No, it's not. No, I mean, HVO, for example, our bioliquid that we've been championing the past 2-3 years. We've had it in our lab tests now. And we also have trials in several places around the UK. One particular one is in a public house in Lincolnshire, where we've got a funded 3-year trial going on there with our Sapphire boiler and fully modulating, compensating controls. And the savings are phenomenal already for the customer, plus the actual carbon emissions as well are 90% carbon saving over what they had previously. I mean, it's absolutely fantastic, especially for a public house That is, they have very specific, particular heat demands with doors opening constantly, in different areas of the property they need to control.
Yeah, we can definitely attest to HVO. We actually joined the trial for HVO, which is hydro treated vegetable oil, and we've been really impressed with it. It's running in our a kind of old boiler, if you like, as well as our heat pump. We've got both, and the HVO is doing a really good job. It is a biofuel, and it is not coming from a food crop. It is not coming from deforestation. It is not affecting any of those things. It is a waste product, and I have to say we've been really impressed with it. Can you just talk to us a little bit about how can we get biofuels more integrated with boilers throughout the country? And you mentioned Sapphire Boiler. Can you tell us a little bit more about the Sapphire Boiler?
The Sapphire Boiler is our boiler we've developed basically from scratch. We are really a burner manufacturer at heart. So for many years, we've done modulating burners mainly for the gas industry. However, it's always the oil industry for domestic market has always just had an on-off application, which to explain on-off is basically a single fixed burner system. So the boiler turns on, a flame appears, it burns for several minutes and turns off again until the next time the heat is required. So what we've developed is a fully modulating system. So the boiler will fire up and then the flame will modulate to the heat load. It's a much more efficient way of controlling the heat rather than blasting heat, turning off, blasting again, because you've got cold cycles going through the boiler, which makes it quite inefficient. We originally did it in the lab tests through a certified test house, and we were seeing 15 to 20% savings on fuel compared to a leading boiler brand. And we're not talking an old boiler here, we're talking a brand new leading boiler compared to the Sapphire Boiler. Your second question about HVO. HVO is ready to roll out. It's used in multiple demonstration sites already around the UK. And basically what we need to now get is government backing really on the fuel and open up certain markets, because it's a supply and demand. Okay, at the moment the costs are higher than fossil fuel. This is the problem. If the markets can be opened up, the US market, there's been discussions of HVO in the US is produced en masse there, which could actually come over to the UK and solve the questions against sustainability of the fuel and supply chain of the fuel. Off-gas grid customers wouldn't have to spend thousands of pounds renovating their properties, because many people don't want to be chopping floors up and cutting holes in the walls and that kind of thing to put new pipework in. Many people just want a simple change, and HVO can give that straight away with a small modification to the burner, clean the tank out, and away you go. So it's a very cost-effective way to decarbonise.
Yeah, we can absolutely attest to that. We joined the trial. We had to switch over from, we weren't using our boiler because it was burning previously kerosene. We were using our heat pump. But to join the trial, when they switched us over and they removed the kerosene and put the HVO in, it was absolutely seamless. It was, literally a couple of guys in the house for half an hour, cup of tea, and then they were on their way and we were hooked up. And it's been really impressive as a fuel. So we're really excited about HVO ourselves.
And so we posted that video, and it's been quite interesting to see the reaction from kind of hardcore air source heat pump users. They have been critical of us actually utilizing HVO because now, that the basic mentality, I think, of a lot of people is that you're still burning stuff. When you actually look at HVO, when you look at the emissions from HVO versus the electricity that comes off the grid, we've actually worked out that in January, our carbon footprint was actually lower using HVO than what the electricity grid was providing. So how do we address those concerns now amongst people that still think, well, you're still burning something, it's got to be bad for the environment as opposed to running electricity?
That's a good point, because many don't realise that electricity is not green. It's still way off the mark, and it's going to take several years or decades to actually become a green grid. I mean, on days like today, we're probably burning 5% coal still on the actual grid. So it's slightly misleading to think I've got a heat pump or I've got a ground source heat pump and I'm totally green. That's not the case. Same with our electric cars. We're not as green as we think we are at the moment. It will come eventually. It will come eventually, but often it's down to environmental changes. For example, if there's no particular wind that day, you can see the grid actually change on the day. Suddenly you get 50% gas-fired power stations ramping up to 100% supply. And you see the balance coming in. And then on particularly cold days, you see up to 5% coal happening. It's a nice future, but we're not quite there yet. The liquid fuel industry, i.e. the oil industry, needs to be given time as well to actually decarbonize as well, because we are doing it, but we're a small industry compared to the gas industry and the future heat pump industry as well. We're only there's only 1 million homes in the UK on oil currently. We feel that we should be given time because we've really got a good fuel here at the HVO, and and it's ready now. It just needs a little bit more government incentive to actually get this thing rolling out properly.
So you mentioned that the Sapphire boiler that you sell is modulated or modulating. Can you just tell me, what does that mean?
So modulation basically means, say for example, you've got a really cold day in your house and you turn the boiler up to maximum, and the boiler will automatically fire up to maximum power. But as the temperature in the house increases, the boiler will sense that and it will modulate, it will reduce its power to a lower amount. So you're not delivering the full amount of power into the property constantly. We use what we call the open Therm protocol, it sounds complicated, but basically all it is a communication between the thermostat and the boiler. So every half a second, the thermostats in the house are communicating with the boiler and telling the boiler, right, we need more heat, we need less heat. And it's on a multi-zonal system, like if you had your radiators all zoned in the house with TRVs, which are electronically controlled, you will find that each radiator then will have its own zone. So each area of your house will control itself then and feed information back to the boiler. And it's a far more efficient way of actually controlling the heating.
So boilers, my understanding about boilers, and I'm I know very little, but my understanding of boilers is that they are a high hot burn, so they come on, they really ignite, they blast the heating, and they turn off and go cold really quickly. So when you say it's modulating, does that mean that it's basically burning all the time?
Not all the time, but it will be burning a longer time than a normal boiler, but it's delivering less heat. So the fear with many consumers in the UK is, the boiler's on, so it must be costing me a fortune. It's actually more efficient to have the heating on a modulating boiler, ticking over on low fire for longer periods of time than having the boiler turning off and then having to catch up again with the heating. So having a modulating heat load, basically let the controls do the work for you. Stop worrying about timing the boiler and everything like that. Let the controls actually decide when it needs to come on, how, and it will actually calculate in its algorithm. It's cold outside, I'll need to come on 10 minutes earlier today, and it will find out the most optimized way of actually delivering the heat in the most efficient way.
So my understanding of boilers is that they come on, they blast, they go cold really quickly. And so I think it might be fair to say that traditional boilers are a bit stupid. They're a bit dumb. They're not very intelligent. Is a modulating boiler like a Sapphire boiler more intelligent? It's doing a lot more, it's calculating a lot more, and it's behaving a lot more intelligently.
Yeah, so basically it's the next step on. The industry really needs this step change for not just consumers, but also to convince government that the liquid fuel industry actually has a future and it can drive down savings, especially in these climates now when you hear of huge fuel bills. I've seen the paper this morning, it's like everyone's panicking now that some bills have been going through the roof shortly. So we need to have a technology that consumers can buy and know they can actually save some money. One of our customers is saving up to 5 litres of fuel per day. Now, that doesn't sound a lot when you say 5 litres.
That is a lot.
But you actually calculate that over 6 months, you're talking about £500 over that 6-month period through the winter time. Even the investment in some smart controls for the property, you've got your payback already there within 6 months. So it's investment in the smart technology now, which will help consumers actually drive down their bills long term.
Oddly enough, it sounds like the modulating boiler runs more like an air source heat pump, if you like, that kind of lower heat. My question would be, why aren't more boilers on the market self-modulating then?
I think it's down to cost. The oil boiler market it seems to be a little bit, although the manufacturers have got very similar pricing structures, they use the same kind of technology, and it's a relatively reliable heating system, or heating medium, should we say. So it's basically a low-cost boiler, very simple design, hasn't really changed in many years, but consumers tend to like them because they're reliable and robust. It doesn't help us when we're trying to reduce carbon and save energy moving forward. This is the main issue. The old boiler, good as it is, we need to evolve now to have a future energy market that's actually going to be sustainable.
As I said earlier, I don't really know too much about boilers, but mainly because we haven't really used one, and when we've only just kind of turned it on this winter, haven't we?
Yeah.
And before that, we were using our heat pump. So there's a lot of terminology that's new to me. One of the things that I picked up from Oz recently was a condensing boiler and how our boiler needs to condense. So can you just explain to us about condensing boilers, and then kind of how, if people think that they've got a condensing boiler, they think, well, then I don't need a modulating one. So just tell us about how the terms are very different.
So condensing boiler, most boilers now are condensing boilers. They have been for several years. It's legislation that came in several years back. A condensing boiler, you'll know the difference because it's got a drain on the bottom of the boiler. So basically it takes all the latent flue gases, the chimney flue temperature, and it reuses that temperature and puts it back through the boiler again, so through a secondary heat exchanger on a traditional boiler. So your traditional temperature, your original temperature, would have been about 200 degrees C. On a condensing boiler, you're down to under 60, 70 degrees, because you're actually reusing that heat that would normally go into the atmosphere. So a condensing boiler was a fantastic step change or technology change for the market, absolutely. But modulating goes a step further.
Is it correct to say that actually a lot of people that have condensing boilers and that have them installed, their boilers are actually not condensing because the settings haven't been done, or they need to change something on the boiler? Can you just talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good question, because the common boiler swap is people put a new boiler in and they don't actually then balance the system. The system needs to be balanced right the way through. All the radiators will need checking with flow and return temps on each radiator to ensure you've got a temperature differential across each radiator to ensure the return water back to the boiler is as cool as possible. Because if you don't balance your radiators, the heat will be going straight through from the boiler, right away, rattling through the radiators and back to the boiler at too higher temperature. The boiler will not then condense. And that's the problem. People would save, I don't know how much money per year if they actually had their system balanced. It's a simple thing. They could get the heating engineer in and say, can you come in and balance my system for me? And you'd be able to do that within a couple of hours, and they'll be seeing savings instantly from that.
So if somebody's got a bog standard boiler in their property at the moment and they want to put in a Sapphire or a modulating boiler in, is it a simple exchange, just taking the old one out and putting a new one in?
Yeah, you can do that within a day's labour, then another day or so with the controls. It's a very easy boiler swap. Obviously a clean out, a flush out of the system, and then put our boiler in, and then commission the controls. Yeah, for a decent engineer, a couple of days work tops.
You mentioned the actual controls. So does that mean that if so, let's say for example somebody doesn't have smart TRVs or smart thermostats and they've only got the old school TRVs, would Open Therm still work in a scenario like that?
Yes, you could actually use the Open Therm. It can be very minimal, or you can have an all singing, all dancing system. So for example, you could use a basic wall thermostat, which is Open Therm. So a traditional thermostat that you're familiar with, you could use that on the Sapphire boiler as long as it's got open therm protocol. You can then do a further step in then having all your radiators and further zones. You can even have motion sensors fitted. Some of our customers have got motion sensors. So they actually build up a picture of what goes on in your property. So it works out the occupied rooms. Are you in the kitchen more in the day or in the lounge? And then it'll build up a profile of your house specifically and adjust the heating accordingly to your lifestyle, basically. So that's the extreme end. Obviously, it's expensive. It's going to cost you maybe £1,500 in controls to get to that level. Or you can have some controls for maybe up to £150, £200 for a basic open therm thermostat, and you can then keep your existing thermostat TRVs on your radiators then as well. It can be as big as small as you want to go, really.
Let's talk about bivalent systems. So we've got an air source heat pump and we've got an oil boiler. The one thing that we've discovered recently is that we're trying to get the two to actually communicate with one another. And that has got its own... They do not like each other. They really do not like to coexist. I know that we've actually spoken about this previously off camera, but if you have got a Sapphire boiler, for example, that has got an air source heat pump that is open therm enabled, are you then able to, if, for example, we know the electricity tariffs are going up and you want to run your HVO ahead of the air source heat pump, is that possible to do?
If the control system is open therm enabled, then yes. This is the issue at the minute we're finding with some controls are not open therm compatible. So this is something we want to work with industry to actually make sure we do have something for the future here. Because as you say, if you want to actually switch over, you might want to run HVO for a few months, or I'm running low on fuel, I want to go over to electricity. You want those options there. And on many systems, to control the boiler, as you mentioned yourself, Mars, the boiler will just fire up and it will blast and then it will turn off, almost short cycling. Yeah, so it's because the control system is not really allowing it to run properly. It's just turning on, turning off in very short space of time. That's not a very efficient way of actually using your fuel. So moving forward, it would be great to have some collaborations with controls manufacturers so we can actually have a true hybrid system if that was a situation that was desired.
I think maybe you need to start talking to the MCS, because what we're hearing in the last 24 hours that the MCS are kind of dictating an awful lot of like the fact that if you're getting a heat pump, the heat pump has to be the primary source of control. So the MCS, it's a conversation we need to have with them as well as to opening up that flexibility to give homeowners back control themselves so that they can actually choose how they heat their homes. We want to be environmentally conscious. We want to do the right thing for the environment. Of course we do. We need to start to address carbon neutrality, absolutely. But we can't leave homes behind and in fuel poverty. We have to be able to, a one size fits all, I don't think we're not at that stage. Mm-hmm. And I think we need to give everybody a little bit more flexibility and options so that they are able to afford their heating.
Absolutely. I think in the future, what we need is a carbon emission factor. And as long as that particular heating system can meet that factor, it shouldn't matter what the actual fuel is, as long as it's black and white. Okay, that is the carbon emissions you are allowed to emit for that property. And then you can use this, you can use a heat pump, you can use a boiler, you can use
ground
electric
source
heating. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's just, if we have a blanket carbon emission, and then industry will then adapt. We know where we are then, and when we can evolve our products then. The moment it's not clear as to which way it's going to go eventually. So we just need some black and white information from the government. There we go. There's your carbon emission. Go with it. That's what you've got to work with now.
Can I ask you, do you feel, as being an inside the industry, that central heating hasn't really evolved and it hasn't really done anything for the last 20-30 years, but suddenly in the last kind of 5 years there's this real kind of renaissance of innovation and things? Everybody's kind of talking about what they can do within their sector of their central heating, whether it's boilers or heat pumps or solar, those kind of things are all kind of coming together and really being pushed forward to become more innovative.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's really interesting times at the minute. I mean, I've never seen so much change in the industry for the past 5 years, and it's amazing what you can do. Maybe Complacency was there. I mean, there's some very, very good boiler manufacturers out there. It's educating the installer as well to make sure they're actually picking the right boiler for the right property and the right controls as well. So training is sadly lacking in many areas for actually installer training. And this is something that we really want to sort of get to grips with, is making sure that it's the right choices for the installer and the homeowner. So almost like a government app or something like that would be fantastic for the installer to be able to go along to a property, put in the credentials of the property, and it will actually then say what is the most suitable energy for this property. And then the installer knows what he's doing. There's not any kind of comeback then from the customer going, you've installed me the wrong equipment and now it's costing me a fortune. I think this is the fear at the moment. That's why they just keep on installing the same amount of equipment, shall I say, every time, because it's what they know. So anything new technology, it's like, I don't know whether I should be fitting that just in case something goes wrong. So it's they need to have the confidence from the actual manufacturers that this kit is going to do what it says.
So the Sapphire boiler that we discussed runs on oil. Is there a gas equivalent?
From us, no. We are mainly a manufacturer of oil. But we like to call it liquid fuel now. So for us, we haven't developed a gas Sapphire boiler, but there are many gas boilers out there that are suitable for open therm. So we don't make one, but there's many good manufacturers out there that will make a very good modulating open therm boiler for the future. And many are already hydrogen blend ready.
So you mentioned training earlier, and the fact that the UK, we've got real issues with regards to getting our next generation of central heating engineers and plumbers and things really engaged in more kind of environmentally friendly options. Can you tell us, for example, with HVO, does anybody need a special qualification to be able to come in and change your boiler from a kerosene burning boiler to HVO?
We always recommend that it's an off-tech registered engineer anyway, but we've actually developed a HVO training course, which is online. And it's a couple of hours of basic changing over. It refers to the HVO handbook, which is available now in the public domain. And we basically walk you through what a conversion would look like, the properties of HVO compared to kerosene, things to look out for on the commissioning, and that kind of thing. And it's £12.50 just to download from our website. And that will give you enough information to do a conversion over there. And you can also contact us for HVO advice on converting the boiler as well anytime.
So the one thing that I can't get my head around is that the government is putting this boiler ban in place. But if things like HVO come into effect where they are mainstream and they are able to heat properties
in a clean way,
what then happens to the boiler industry? Does the boiler industry continue? Is it then that you just can't buy kerosene, but you can only buy HVO? How's that all going to work?
Yeah, so from 2026, they've highlighted at the moment that will be the cut-off date for purchasing an oil boiler. That's kerosene or gas oil or whatever you want to put into it. So, but HVO boilers will be available. So we're already offering a HVO boiler and an oil boiler, even though either can be converted. We will be offering a HVO boiler out there. So they're not going to just stop supplying kerosene to oil boiler customers. They simply can't cut off an industry like that. So what they'll do is they'll try and phase it out. So 2026 will be no more oil boilers sold. However, you can buy HVO, and by then HVO will be nicely into the infrastructure, and away you go. So we're hoping for a smooth transition from kerosene through to HVO, and then the customer won't really notice much difference. They've still got their what was their oil boiler. It's been converted to HVO. They're now 90% less carbon emitting than they were before, which is a fantastic achievement if we can do it.
So you mentioned that there's going to be a specific HVO boiler versus normal boilers. Is there a fundamental change between the two, or is it just a matter of putting a different sticker on the box?
There is small changes on the actual operation of the boiler, particularly for the Sapphire. We use a different internal air nozzle, a different fan scroll speed. So basically it's a different commissioning setup. However, one of our technicians could come out to an existing sapphire boiler that's running on kerosene and do a conversion on site within half an hour or so. It's quite a quick conversion, but there are some small changes on our sapphire boiler to make it a HVO boiler.
So with the amount of negative press that has surrounded boilers, especially in the last 12 months, is that something that concerns you with regards to the future of, for example, fuels, clean fuels like biofuels? Because, you know, if we start to convince the whole population that all boilers are bad news, how do we then kind of backtrack a few years from now and say, actually, you can just use HVO? Though those people have already been convinced that it's a boiler and it's bad news and I don't want it. So where is the PR going, and how do you think that's going to be tackled?
There's so much negative press about, oh, your boiler's going, your boiler's going to be, you're going to have to take your boiler out, for example. None of this is actually going to happen. It will be the natural churn of boilers. Boilers are not getting banned. If you've got a boiler in your house, it's not going to come along and take it away from you. You know, that's simply not going to happen. We're talking generations here. This is a generational milestone for decarbonisation. We're not just going to do this within a couple of years or decades even. It's going to take a considerable amount of time to actually come through. One thing that does strike fear into many of us in the industry is the eco schemes and that kind of thing that we've seen in the past, when you get a government grant to fit a product, and then unfortunately you then get the cowboy companies that come in then and they do a very poor job because they're getting the money to do the grant. And this is a worry that the wrong equipment will be fitted just purely to line the pockets of unscrupulous installers. And this has happened many times before. So it's we've got to watch out that this is not a scandal waiting to happen. You know, have you been missold, etc., etc. You know, we've got to watch out for this, because they will be looking to make some money out of these green incentives moving forward.
Yeah, I think that the danger is that when you take an industry as wide and as diverse as the central heating industry, and especially in the property market that has, you know, just umpteen amounts of different styles of properties, and you think that you're just going to jam one fits all kind of solution into all of those properties, that's a very, very dangerous, risky game. And I think that, you know, then you have to add on to that people's lifestyles and people's different incomes and people's different life priorities in their homes. Then you start to realize that actually, as a conversation, it needs to be a diverse conversation, and we need to have a lot more choices, and we need to have a lot more diverse solutions that are carbon neutral, or certainly carbon sensitive, and that they are working towards our goals as a country, but that we can carry everybody forward together, giving everybody a chance to adapt at their own kind of speed.
No, exactly. And I would guess that most of the boiler installations in the UK, I don't know what the figure is, but most of them would probably be like an emergency situation. Their boiler's split and it's beyond economical repair, and they've just asked their installer, get me a new boiler, and I need one by the weekend. And that's it. The choice is by the installer, not really by the homeowner, because they just want the heating back on. So this is, you know, and then that boiler's there then for another 15 years. This step change is going to be very, very problematic to actually change the technology, when so many cases are an emergency boiler exchange.
Interesting. Well, thank you so much, Martin. It's been an absolute pleasure, and it's been interesting to look at boilers and think about boilers in a different way, and, you know, how we can adapt them, and how, you know, as you said, the tech is changing in them, and that there maybe is a role they can play in a more environmentally conscious way in our homes.
Thanks for having me. Thanks very much.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.